Hey chillers, welcome back to my channel. So it is Wednesday, which means it is Spooky Day. So today I'm reading a story that I found on Reddit, and the name of it is I Was Born into a Cult. Pretty cute. So it is from Reddit user Clarkinator69. Wow, so mature. This is part 1, there is a part 2, and if you want me to, I will do a video of that next week. So give me a thumbs up if you like this video, and I'll do part 2 next week. Alright, let's jump right in. I grew up in a cult, and not a benign one. I spent my entire childhood and most of my adult years as well in that society. This wasn't your typical cult, and my experience is far from typical. I escaped from them nearly 10 years ago, and I decided to come forward about it on here. Why come forward now, you may be asking? There's no particular reason, although recent headlines have jogged my memory. These headlines are not related to my experience in any way, but they are about another cult. Aum Shinrikyo. For those who don't know, AS is what I'm going to call Aum Shinrikyo. AS is probably one of the worst cults in modern history. It was a doomsday cult in Japan that left a wake of carnage and death in the 1980s and 90s. The group assassinated critics and killed dissident members. In 1995, the group attacked the Tokyo subway with sarin nerve gas. The attack killed 13 and would have killed thousands if it had been done properly. The group's founder, Shoko Asahara, along with 12 of his followers, was rightly sentenced to death for these atrocities. Earlier this month, Japan executed all 13 of them in 2 separate mass hangings. That is all true, and you can Google if you want to. It's time for me to delve into another cult, one that you won't find by doing a Google search. As I already said, my story is much different than most cult members. I wasn't a runaway or a druggie or a broken teen who hated the world. I didn't choose to be a part of this. My parents did. Or maybe it was their parents. I don't know the full extent of my lineage or how far in the cult's history it is rooted. Family history was a forbidden subject. It distracted oneself from enlightenment and was egocentric. The usual bull these people spout. The important thing to note is that I was born into it and that most members weren't. I say weren't because I have every reason to believe that the cult is no longer active. Many of the people were recruits, people who had joined because they wanted answers. These are the people that mostly fit my earlier description. Alienated teens, runaways, the depressed, and other vulnerable people. It still sickens me these folks were preyed upon so horribly. As a born member, I had more status than most. My parents had status, and I had inherited it or something like that. Only members of status were allowed to have children or relationships. Such egocentric pursuits were forbidden until one had achieved enlightenment. Newsflash, most never attained it. Most worked themselves to death, or were executed for suspected dissent, or died from some draconian punishment. I was shielded from that. I'm both thankful and guilty for it. My job wasn't that unusual, to be honest. I received a basic education. I guess that was the only normal part. Actually, sermons from a disembodied voice and living in a bunker aren't exactly normal. I guess it's time to go into more detail about the cult, though. You've heard enough about me for now. We were situated deep in the Appalachian Mountains. That is a big place, so I say that without fear of you finding the place. Given how rural and isolated we were, we definitely had recruiters operating outside of the place. It's the only explanation for the steady influx of newcomers we had. The visible communal part of the base consisted of a small village deep in the mountains. This village was very old. I can tell by the architecture style of the buildings. Much of this village was used for assigned housing with guards outside them at night. The perimeter was patrolled by armed guards as well. Escape was a sin, a blasphemous rejection of enlightenment and the guidance of our prophet. Life in the place was hell for those folks. It was a monotonous agrarian society for them. 16 hours of work in the farm, 2-hour religious seminars in the village church, 6 hours to sleep, or do something else, I suppose. That village was all most members ever got to see, but there was more. Only the Enlightened had access to the bunker beneath, and even that wasn't without restrictions. The office and laboratory of the Society's Dr. John Ferris was off limits. I put doctor in quotation marks because he wasn't a real doctor, at least not a medical one. He may have had a doctorate in something, but I refuse to call anyone a doctor if they aren't saving lives. Maybe that's disrespectful to education, but I don't care. I hated Ferris more than anyone else there. He always thought of himself as the next great mind, the next Newton or Einstein. Einstein. Why did I say Eisenstein? He felt he was the greatest mind of his era, and that he was destined for greatness. I always saw him for what he was, a deluded blowhard and self-important douchebag. If he hadn't joined the cult, he probably would have ended up on some back street with a heroin needle in the crook of his arm. He was the only Enlightened member I know of that wasn't born into the cult. He joined in 1970, the same year I was born. He was a ufologist in his late 20s then, and felt our cult had the answers he needed. Our cult felt his education and writing could give us an air of legitimacy. At least he and our leader both felt there was a mutual benefit. Ferris was more central to my experiences than I wish. And speaking of our leader, he was even more secretive. The quarters of Prophet Elroy Carrington were not to be entered without explicit permission, and he never left them. For this reason, I always assumed the sermons were either recordings or broadcast. I didn't learn how wrong I was until I met him. Every born member would be granted an audience with him upon turning 18. I still remember it vividly, and it's as good as a place as any to finally start running narration. I walked to the most heavily guarded room in the deepest depths of the bunker, finding myself greeted by stone-faced guards. After stating my purpose and providing proof, I was wordlessly let in. The door immediately slammed behind me. "Prophet Carrington," I called out. "In here," an otherworldly voice answered. The voice was garbled and sounded as if it were being scrabbled. I followed the voice and was greeted by a bedridden old man. And by old, I mean old. He was withered and wizened. Wizened? I don't know what that word is. With skin stretched over a skeletal frame. His face was gaunt and his eyes were sunken. "Hello, Brother Robert," he said. His mouth barely even moved as he spoke. God, I cannot talk. I bowed as I had been told was required by decorum. "Good. I know your bloodline was enlightened, and I suppose you would like to know some history," he continued. "Yes, Prophet," I answered. "I founded our little slice of heaven 123 years ago. I know that sounds impossible, but enlightenment makes the impossible happen." I remained silent, captivated. I had not yet questioned my upbringing. "This country was still in its relative infancy when I was born in the year 1800, Carrington continued. "I was always fascinated with the universe, with life and death, with this world and this plane of existence. I was convinced that there is more than this life, but I also viewed the Judeo-Christian teachings as a falsehood. I had only briefly heard of that religion growing up. I now suspect I was only told of it so I'd understand the speech." Carrington continued his story. "For years I stared at the stars, wondering what knowledge they held. I was taken for a fool, the village idiot. Years passed, and I feared I would never find the truth. I still remember the day I was vindicated. It was 1865. I was getting older, and I feared my flame would be extinguished before I found the answers. But he came to me one night as I watched the stars, a crashing, burning ball of metal. Inside this strange, crashed vessel was an inhuman being. I followed my instinct when I ate the alien's flesh and drank its blood, believing it would extend my life indefinitely and provide insight. It did, but it also paralyzed me from the neck down. Well, if you drink alien blood and eat it, of course you're going to get paralyzed. I am still alive at the age of 188, and I know the truth. Thought I heard something. Life exists on many planes. Ordinarily they don't touch, but through enlightenment we seek to interrogate them. Or integrate them, not interrogate. To open the gateway to allow other presences into ourselves in our world. To enlighten the entire world. I stared in awe as if I were an ordinary child who had just learned the truth about where babies come from. Now, do you pledge to dedicate your life to the enlightenment of the world, Robert? Carrington asked. Yes, I do, I replied solemnly. We will see, Carrington responded. You must prove your dedication now. It is time for your confirmation. What must I do? Part of achieving world enlightenment is purging the world of filth. Last night, a member tried to flee. He insults the world and my teachings. Prove yourself worthy and purge him, Carrington stated. I felt shocked. For the first time in my life, I was hesitant about something, but I quickly brushed it aside and agreed to the deed. The execution was surreal. I had witnessed them before and was relatively desensitized, but actually being the executioner is different. I stood at the center of the village, rifle in hand. My parents beamed in pride at their newly minted son. Looking back now, I'm disgusted and guilt-ridden, but that is now. This was then. The dissident was led to me and brought to his knees. He was young, barely older than me. He was hyperventilating and terrified. He was begging to go home, to be let go. I was disgusted by his lack of fortitude, his rejection of the truth. I stood silent as another member read the death order issued by Carrington. He looked down in defeat and terror as I pulled the trigger. I still see his face when I go to sleep. With this moment, I started a new and dark chapter of my life. I had shed my innocence and began my new life as a brutal cult enforcer. Ugh. Ugh. Well, that was pretty creepy. I mean, born into a cult, that would be awful. Like I said, there is a part 2 to this series, so if you enjoyed this and you want to see part 2, let me know down below, and I will leave a link to this story down below. As always, if you enjoyed my videos, enjoy this video, please give me a thumbs up so I know. You can click here to subscribe to my channel, like my button is right here. You can click here to see something new, and you can click here to see my last video. And I will see you guys on Thursday, or Friday. Peace out, chillers.